So one of the things that intrigued me upstairs when you were doing the presentation a little while ago, you said, how could I create portraits of power and leadership using new technologies? The network seems to be the answer to that question. Can you expand on how you decided on this massive format?
Sure. Well, if we think about the traditional form of portraiture, for example, Avedon's series, The Family, by virtue of the technology he was using, he locks himself into that single moment in time and trying to encapsulate everything about the individual. And certainly we see here at the National Portrait Gallery that same, if you will, technological threshold is exercised with every painting and every sculpture and every print and every drawing here. So the ability to create a portrait that can flow over time, where we can hear the sitter in their own first-person voice talk about those things that are important to them and try and tease out their ideological strands, their personality, that to me looked like a giant green opportunity and challenge in terms of creating portraits of people, where really it was the ability to tell the story of them in a very in-depth way. So video seemed like the completely natural tool to use to capture that.
So it wasn't so easy, however. We had many stub toes along the way. I mean, we had promised to deliver a finished sequence of the human genome in 15 years at a time when the technology to do that hadn't been invented. So there was a lot of promise here that had to be based upon developments that you couldn't be confident of.
It seems like a manifestation of William Faulkner, As I Lay Dying, or John Hersey, multiple points of view. You've got one person in the center and they seem to become the event, and then you surround them with portraits of themselves. How did you decide on the myriad of images that you, and how did you decide on that, and how did you craft that?
Well, each sitting took place at the National Portrait Gallery on stage, and I sat about 2.5 feet from the sitter, and we arrayed 3 cameras around me, 2 off to one side and 1 on the other side, and they looked at the sitter there. So we were able to capture them in about 120 degrees. And each time I asked a question, which is excised from the piece, the cameras changed focal length. So what we were able to do through that strategy is over the course of 45 minutes, have 30 or 40 different focal lengths and kind of camera angles all the way around them. And the idea really was to remove portraiture from the direct frontality, where the sitter had the ability to compose themselves for something, and we got that single view, and instead wrap around them. So it becomes more intimate suddenly. It becomes more voyeuristic, and that ability to look at someone in profile and look at the contours of their face and see that their face moves, see them gesticulate, that became part of the texture of the portrait that I wanted to capture, to really get a feeling of who somebody is beyond their role, but on a very personal level, explain them or gain insight to them.
Well, first, you know, it's really interesting. And, you know, as commanders, you go visit all the time in the hospital. But before that, when I did it, it was kind of an experience. It's always a, it's an uncomfortable experience when you do it initially, because you don't know what to do, you don't know what to say all the time. But having gone through with my son, I learned what it was like to be around wounded warriors. And so I felt comfortable around them. I understood what to say. I understood how to talk to them. I understood that they just want you to be honest with them, talk about everything about it. They like to talk about their injuries. They like to retell the stories. They like to, you know, and so for me, it's made it very easy for me and my wife to do this, and my wife has become very dedicated to working.
The theme of this work is power, or one of the great themes that echoes over and over again. Am I correct on that first? And if so, can you expand on your own notions of power and how they play into this piece and in the wider sense?
Sure. So power is a double-edged word. And it's one of those words which polarizes people, as does words like influence. So as we began the project, started thinking about it, we were doing a lot of etymological gymnastics, trying to come up with other words to try and hunt around this. And in the end, power most succinctly describes what this is. And we started to translate it into different variants to understand who should be included, the ability to influence a conversation, the ability to direct a conversation, the ability to influence an agenda, the ability to change things. And so as we started to break it apart into these children, we started to have a better understanding of who should be in the project and how we defined power. And all of those ultimately co-join to be criteria that establish who was included in the project itself.
Again, I would say to you, how far we've come, how far we have to go. The important Supreme Court decision of Griswold, which decided in the mid-60s that married couples could legally purchase contraception. Married couples legally purchase contraception was a landmark decision because it really addressed the right of privacy and women making the most personal of decisions about when and under what circumstances to become pregnant.
Was there anyone you involved in the project you didn't think you were going to be able to land? Was there a fish you were surprised to catch, as it were?
Well, you know, there were a lot of people that I tried to get a lot of people. I aimed high for the project and got a lot of no's, got a lot more yeses in the project. Yeah, there were a number of people who it grew incrementally. I think one of the first ones was Eric Cantor, when he agreed to be part of the project, and I thought, boy, we've really hit a plateau. And then, Chief of Staff of the Army agrees, and then, Nancy Pelosi agrees, then, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs agrees, and it just kept growing and growing and growing. So it was an incremental project, tickled all the way along, right? That is happening.
So, is there anyone out there who is going to walk into that room and see that work and say, I'm a lot more powerful than these people? and
I'm sure. And DC's full of those people, right? And so the idea here wasn't to create a top 100 in DC list. There's plenty of those out there. The idea here was really, what if I could become part of the bloodstream of this conversation at this point in time? And what does that look like? And who are these nodes within it? And it can only be who I happen to come across. So there's a bit of luck in all of this. And there's something, I kind of live my life that way, and there's a beauty to that. So I let it just become the DNA for this project. And I think it yielded something that's truly special.